Hi, welcome to the Lemoyne Center's English class. I am your teacher, Mr. Bauhof, and today we're going to be talking about different terms, or rather words, that we really shouldn't use. Now, I want to make something very clear. In your everyday conversation, you're talking to your friends, your family, maybe you're just running to a stranger on the street. It's okay to use these words. The sort of hidden secret to English, or language rather, is that there are no absolute rules, like don't use this word. Well, if we don't use that word, then why does the word itself exist? You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about here. We'll use a word like ain't. Well, ain't shouldn't exist, you may say. It should be aren't. Well, the word ain't, it does exist to people. So it's okay to use certain words, but especially when you're doing writing for a class or a resume, anything where there's an official meaning to it all, you do want to avoid certain pitfalls. And as an English teacher, I can tell you I've experienced this in my own life, and so it's important to try and combat that. Alright, so let me tell you my big pet peeve. Thing. Oh my goodness. I first began ranting about my hatred of the word thing when I ran into a foreign student, actually. And what was interesting to me is that as he's trying to process the English language, he used the word things over and over and over again because it's such a versatile, flexible, all-encompassing word. But that right there is the big danger to using the word things. Because two big problems. Number one, it's vague, and second of all, it's meaningless. Let me explain here for a second. Okay. So, broadly speaking, there are lots of units to words. Nouns, verbs, adjectives, etc. Alright? There are others, but let's just focus on these. The word things, or thing, can be used to describe all those and more. I looked it up in the dictionary just to get sort of a better handle on it. It says, any matter, affair, or concern, a happening, act, incident, event, a tangible object, an inanimate object, an item, a detail, a person. This word, and by the way, this is the reason we like using the word thing so much. It's so broad. It's the whole universe. So, in casual conversation, we'll say, here's the thing. And it works really, really well. Now that we've sort of gotten our feet underneath us, let's start talking about why it's so bad to be vague and meaningless. Or specifically, why it's so bad to be vague and meaningless in any kind of formal writing. Whether you're talking about a class, or if you're going to an event and you have to give a memorized speech, whatever it is that you're doing, let's talk about vagueness. So, to sort of illustrate the point, I took one of the most famous American speeches, the Gettysburg Address, and I decided to take some of these words and substitute them in. Now, although things is my personal pet peeve, there are other terms as well. To go along with things is the word stuff. Think about how broad stuff is. That stuff. This is stuff. I'm made of stuff. It can be really, really big stuff. Mountains of stuff. Or it can be tiny little stuff. Like atoms. We're made up of atomic stuff. It doesn't matter, because it's such a broad term, it can apply to anything. And yes, I do know that I just said the word anything. But I'm not saying that you can't use this word like it's somehow irrational to do that. I'm saying that you should be careful in your speech. That way your terms don't get too vague and your point doesn't get communicated. And what you want, more than anything else when you're talking with someone, is to accurately portray what it is that you mean when you say something. Now, To go along with thing, we have Steph. But there are other ones. Lot and bunch are also twin problems. If I said I have a lot of problems, if I said I had a bunch of problems, you would know that I would have more than a couple of problems, probably, but you wouldn't know how many. A lot of problems could mean that I have hundreds upon hundreds of problems. Big problems, little problems, massive problems, gargantuan problems, and little itty bitty, tiny, minuscule problems. Lots of problems. It isn't really descriptive. If I said, I have sufficient problems at the moment, then you'd have a better grasp about what I mean when I'm talking to you. I'm not saying I just have problems. I have enough problems to deal with right now that I can't take any more on. And it's that second part, the implied part, that I can't take any more on, that really matters to that speech. So if you came to me and you said, well, I have an issue, Mr. Bauhof, I'd like to talk to you right now about this issue. I said, listen, I got enough problems, I have sufficient problems at the moment. Then you would know that I can't take on another one right now. But this can also mean, and I'm not saying this is strictly true, but it can also mean that at a future point, when I have less problems, I'll be able to deal with it. It's clearer what I'm saying to you. And by the way, when you have clearer speech, you'll find that a lot of the issues you run into, I actually started saying a lot at my job, communication is key. Until we're clear with what we mean, until we're direct, it's just as vague. Oh goodness, I hate to say it, but have you ever sat through a conversation or a speech where the person said nothing? I have. There have been points where I'll be sitting in a speech and the person will be really passionate and really intelligent, and they will tell me exactly what they're thinking, why they think it, and how I should interpret what they're saying. And it's great, and I love it. It's like something I can dive into. There are other times where I have been on, listening to someone talk on the internet or on a podcast, and they have communicated so very, very little to me, it's like eating air. There's just nothing to it. There's no substance. There's no purpose, which is what we're actually going to be going into. How to be purposeful with our language and how to be direct with our language. So, bunch and lot are also an issue. And believe it or not, I've actually brought up sort of the third big no-no here. Big and small. Now, the ones I've brought up so far are vague, like what a bunch or a lot are. And I've also sort of talked about terms that are meaningless. Words like things and stuff. It doesn't have any real solid meaning to it, and therefore we often come away with less than any form of meaning. When it comes though to big and small, it's so relative. Okay, let me show you. Is this a lot of liquid? I mean, it depends, right? If I say I drank a lot of liquid, then maybe I did drink a lot of liquid. Or maybe I didn't. If I said I drank a small amount of liquid, how small? How big? It's too vague. Now, I will be diving in. I'm telling you that when I teach, I'm going to challenge you, and you're going to go on a deep dive with me into the actual purpose of language, but I promise you, we'll come all the way back up. So, if at any point it gets a little difficult, just hold on for a little bit. I'll clarify what I mean, and then I'm going to bring you right back up. So, big and small are also an issue because realistically what human beings want is something solid to grasp onto. We want it to be quite direct. Okay, if I said, I'm a big guy. Fun fact, I'm about 6'5". I love being 6'5". It's wonderful. However, am I big? Well, if I say I'm big, that doesn't mean very much. It could mean I'm husky. It could mean that I feel like I'm big. It could mean I'm around a bunch of very short people, which happens more often than it should. And so, there's no real way to know what I mean to you when I say I'm big. But let's pop back to things here. The reason it's an issue is that it is an all-encompassing term. There are other no-nos in formal writing where you're in a classroom or you're writing for a college or for a job. Some matter more than others, frankly, and also, frankly, it depends on the attitude of the person you're writing to. However, one of the reasons you want to bring up the concept of directness is that when you're communicating something, yes, I'm using that term purposely vague, you want the person to walk away changed. I mean, think about, just for a second, let's walk away a little bit from the actual direct lesson and think about the purpose of studying language. Language is an incredible tool in your arsenal. You can take air, just air, and you can move nations with it. We've all seen a single word or phrase, a sentiment vocalized, and it changes the landscape of the world forever. So, to change someone, though, you have to be able to take the thoughts up here and vocalize them. Now, I want to make something very clear here. As you're doing this, as you're thinking about how do I be direct, how do I insert purpose and I use the term here specificity, but just not just have purpose what I mean or be direct about what I mean, but also to communicate accurately what I mean. One of the techniques here is that I'm going to show you what happens when you take direct, purposeful language that is specific and make it vague. So I took the Gettysburg Address and I rewrote it with these very vague terms. A bunch of years ago, our fathers brought forth on this thing a new thing, conceived in stuff and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, you'll notice here, the beginning of that sentence was meaningless. It was garbled. It didn't really communicate any form of substance. It was like eating junk food. There's nothing you can absorb there. But the very end of that sentence, which I did not alter, had purpose, meaning, and it communicated a thought to you. It communicated the thought that all men are created equal. Now, let's talk for a second here. I have covered, I think, the purpose of being direct. That you want to get the ideas from up in your head out. But let's take a second and think about purpose here. Okay. At this stage, we look back at Lincoln. Today we look back and we know how it all turns out. The Union wins the Civil War, they reunite, Lincoln's assassinated. He doesn't have that knowledge. He only knows that before him lies an incredible task of trying to get a lot of different people who are hurt and angry, confused, upset, get them all on the same page. And he only has a few minutes to do it. This is one of the reasons that we continually teach the Gettysburg Address, is because not only is this a good speech, he uses terminology that works, if you do a deep dive on the politics of it, it's actually really interesting, a lot of the thinking he comes up with. But frankly, it's also really important to just note how short it is. But he packs it full of meaning, that all men are created equal. Now, if you just took that one phrase, and someone actually at Gettysburg actually did this, and they just went on and on and on for hours and hours and hours. Yes, you've communicated what you mean, but you need to take that meaning to you. What does it mean to be equal to others? I said a minute ago about how language is a tool in your arsenal. And it can be used for great goodness or great evil. And that can happen whether you want it to or not. You can really, really hurt someone by accident if you're not careful with your meaning. So think for a second here about your purpose. Think for a second here about the consequences that your words can have. Yes, I can teach you how to be direct. Yes, I can teach you how to speak with purpose, how to take terms and meanings and phrases like these, and I'll go a little bit here into the term thing, and how powerful that speech is. Now, I've shown you how vague this particular issue is, about how the word things doesn't mean anything. The question is, how do we combat this? Okay, so, you're talking with your mom, and you tell your mom, oh, I left my things at the school. Here's what you may mean by this. You're rushing out the door, had to get home for some reason, left your cell phone, your new sneakers, and your backpack at the school. Mom says, great, I'll grab your stuff. Once more, that big term, right? Grabs your stuff, brings it home. She only has the backpack. Well, how'd that happen? Well, because this term things is so broad, it can just mean the backpack. If you said, Mom, in my haste, I left my cell phone, backpack, and new sneakers at the school, then she knows exactly what you mean. But how do we get from point A to point B? How do we go from, okay, I just use things reflexively, like, oh, that thing that I over there with the things, or the whatchamacallits, and then the thingies, How do we get from that way of talking into a more direct, purposeful, meaningful, specific way of talking? There's a technique to it I'm going to show you. Or at least, this is what I use. I recommend trying it. See what happens. I'm also going to put specific out there. Okay. Here's the first step that I take. Noun, verb, adjective. Okay. So, I substituted in, our fathers brought forth on this thing, a new thing, conceived in stuff. Now, it should be, I believe, conceived in liberty. So, what I do over here is I say, am I talking, when I bring up the word thing or stuff, am I talking about a noun, a verb, or an adjective? If I said, I did a thing yesterday, technically within the sentence it's a noun, but I'm talking about a verb. In this case, it's a noun. I would say that liberty is, just for the sake of what we're talking about here, it's an idea. So you go down here and you say, this is an idea. Alright, now I'm going to reread this sentence, but this time I'm going to substitute idea in. A bunch of years ago, our fathers brought forth on this thing a new thing, conceived in stuff, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, listen to what happens when I put in the term idea. A new thing conceived in ideas and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, it's still not great, but it's a little bit better. Because you're no longer just talking about, stuff. You're now talking about a particular aspect to our humanity, our ideas. Okay, so I have an idea here. What's the next step for liberty? Well, I don't know about you, but when I think about liberty, I think about how people choose to live. Okay, so one of the fun facts here is that Lincoln is really, really clever here. Because people have been fighting back and forth over states' rights and slavery and all this stuff. Should the South be let go? Can the North afford to let it go? They've been fighting over economics, human rights, religion is getting involved. It's a huge mess. So, what do? Here's what he said. I'm going to throw it all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, where it is self-evident that all men are created equal. If it's self-evident, then I don't really have to make a case for it. I just say, these people are created free. How do I know that? Because they act free. Unless you actually, force someone to do some of this stuff, they don't do it, do they? So instead of just limiting liberty to an idea, we're going to say that liberty is an idea of a way of life. I'm aware you cannot read it, but I like to point things out on the board, so pretend like you can. All right, here we go. A bunch of years ago, our fathers brought forth on this thing, a new thing, conceived in a new way of life. It's getting better, isn't it? Listen, a lot of these, I like to call them techniques, because it's better than saying the proper pedagogical method. Okay. Once more, what's that even mean? It's a good technique because once you begin ironing it out, and by the way, I just want to make this clear, because I know that sometimes English teachers can be a little, I am one, I know, okay. It is important to recognize why English teachers are vital to your education. Now, I firmly believe in STEM careers. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. They pay well, they're stable, and they help a nation. Wonderful. But what English can teach is not how to think, but to think. You'll notice as we do this deep dive, and I promise you we'll come all the way back up, don't you worry. But as you do this deep dive, you can start saying to yourself, okay, when I say I want to be free, I want to be a liberated person, okay, but what does that really mean? It means my way of life. That unless someone outside tries to superimpose something on me, how do I behave? How do people behave if you don't force them? Well, they're free and they're equal. And that is so beautiful and so simple. Now, obviously, Lincoln didn't have to go into all of this. He makes a very direct, purposeful statement, and then he just moves on with his life. That's okay. He's Lincoln. But you're you. So one of the things that I'd like you to do here, I want you to do two things. The first is the formal challenge of the homework you're supposed to be doing, and I'll give rules on that so that you know how to do it and do it properly so that nobody gets into trouble here. What I would like you to do here is think about how you use your words. I worked at a job where people just loved to swear, and I grew up in a household where that was unacceptable. And more than occasionally, people would butt heads with me on this. Why don't you just say these words? Are you frightened of the words? No, I'm not frightened of the words. But here's the point I made to them. Okay. Let's say you can use any word you want. What if I challenged you not to use that word? Try and be a little bit more purposeful and meaningful with your term. She couldn't do it. Why not? Because it's air. There's no substance to it. There's no purpose. There are no specifics. There's no meaning to any of it. The point is, if you're going to think about something important, like you're in a fight with a friend, swearing at them just vocalizes you're angry. It doesn't take your thoughts and portray them in a meaningful and purposeful way. And by the way, the opposite is true when they swear at you. But to take your ideas, remove the vagueness and the meaningless terms that you'll use, and be direct and purposeful and specific about what you're talking about. That doesn't mean your problems disappear, but it does mean you're actually capable of making them disappear, because at least they're out there. Instead of just swirling around in your head, where you should just fight, without any resolution. Try to be direct. Not about every little thing, but if something is important, it's important to go through these steps. What in your life is worth that? What in your life is worth taking a moment and saying, you know what? My education is more than a thing. My relationship with my family is more than just a thing. There's purpose and meaning and specific results that I'm looking for. By using that direct language, especially with people you're trying to grow a relationship with, it becomes easier and easier and easier to actually grow that relationship because they know what you mean. Now, I'll conclude on the fact that I am perfectly aware that it's not necessary in every conversation to, let us say, use incredibly powerful rhetoric. I'm aware. There's more to having a friend than yelling about all the things that are bothering you. Although I do that quite often in my own friendships. I'll call somebody up and I'll just, start going on a tangent about something I've been thinking about. But it is important in your life, if something does matter to you, and if it does affect you, that you take a moment and you say, well, what is this thing? Is it something that I do? Is it a way of describing who I am? If it is, what do I specifically understand about it? What makes that part of me a part of me? Really, I use the term suss it out, really deep dive on this. So, we're coming on up. Here's an excellent example of why you can't just throw the word things or stuff in. Here's what I'm going to say. There are certain rules. Pay attention. I want you to take a quote you love, or a song lyric, or maybe the first few sentences from your favorite book. Number one, no vulgarity. I kind of feel like that should be obvious, but okay, I'm just saying, don't throw it out there. But write it down, and then remove all the verbs, all the adjectives, and all the specific nouns, and just put the word things, or stuff, or bunch, or a lot in there. And, try and make this more than just a random sentence. Make this something you care about. I've been throwing out my own terms lately about what I actually like to bring up. I often say, make a deal, keep a deal. I like that a lot because that way you know what you're getting for what you've done. So imagine if instead of saying, make a deal, keep a deal, I said, make a thing, stuff a thing. Okay. It's a lot. But write it down and see if anyone can actually figure out what it actually affected you as. Because I'm telling you, they probably won't. And then once they reply to you, actually put the actual sentence there and tell people why it meant what it meant. Alrighty, that concludes our lesson for today, and have a nice thing.